All right. How is everyone? Happy Friday. I am Ryan Catherwood, and that is Chris Marshall. Thanks for
Hey,
tuning
everybody.
in. You are watching or listening to Alumless, a Chris Marshall advancement consulting production. On the show, we discuss alumni and donor engagement strategies and other trends in university advancement. Thanks to our listeners for making Alumless part of your work routine or your pleasure routine. Today, we are not broadcasting live. We try to be, but sometimes schedules just don't quite allow for it. But we are incredibly excited to bring our special guest today, Matthew Lambert, on the screen just momentarily. We often get a good string of comments going in the LinkedIn. And actually, on this particular broadcast, perhaps Matthew and Chris and I, since we're not live, we can actually be participants in the comments in real time. So look out for that when we're airing. Be sure to ask questions, and we can talk in real time in the comment section of LinkedIn. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast version of Alumless because you won't want to miss the bonus segment with today's guest, Matthew Lambert. All right, Chris, how's it going? Good to see you.
Oh, good. Good to see you again. It's been a whole 2 days.
It's been a whole 2 days. We recorded live on Friday, and here we are on Monday, getting ahead of the game, recording our next session, which I actually like. We get to go ahead and create it and produce it and publish it, and then just watch the magic of the interwebs happen 11:30 on the 11th.
My favorite part of that statement is that you say we, and by we, you mean you do all that stuff. So you're the magic behind it.
Well, I've recorded a couple of podcasts in my day. In fact, Matthew was the first person I interviewed for my personal podcast some years ago, Advancement Legends. Went to his office in Williamsburg and was always grateful that he was my first ever guest in my podcasting journey. So that was pretty cool. Followed closely by Sue Cunningham, and we've reached out to her office a few times, but we're trying to pin her down. We'll get her at some point. But we've actually got a holiday today, Chris. Today is Halloween. You're not wearing your orange, near am I, but we do have orange in the color scheme for CMAC.
Yeah, we do.
What's going on with the Marshall household for Halloween?
Huge holiday, and our 9 and 12-year-old little ones at home. The 20 and 25-year-old aren't as interested, but the little ones are. In our area, we have you can go trick-or-treat on the Friday night of Halloween in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. You can go trick-or-treat tonight in Hellertown, Bethlehem area where we live, but there's also dates over the weekend. So if you really wanted to, you could trick-or-treat 4 nights in our immediate community. So we're going to just go with tonight, though.
That's pretty intense. Now, what is your favorite candy?
Wow. Any. It's probably the answer, unfortunately.
I have a tough time laying off the Halloween candy, I have to admit. Like, it's always good when it's gone. I keep threatening to throw it away.
Snickers, Milky Way, that kind of genre.
Yeah. Well, we were together last week in Buffalo. I think we mentioned that on the last show. We were doing some strategic planning work with Thomas MacArthur and the team at the University of Buffalo, which was great. I came along with you. That was my first foray into a strategic planning project. And I got a chance to observe how you think about things and watch you in action. Maybe you could sort of share with the audience a little bit more about sort of strategic planning, that sort of initial session that we do and the way that you think about strategic planning. What did you want me to sort of witness as you were going through that?
Yeah, I think it's in the first meeting, it's one part sort of standard structure facilitation there's an architecture that I use to sort of take clients through the process. That stays the same, the architecture part of it. So I wanted you to see that and sort of frame that up for you. But what I hope you noticed, and you'll see in meetings too, we do 3 meetings out of the gate on this, and those other half of this meeting and then the other 2 meetings are all about the client, and they're all about UB. In fact, the content that's created, the way in which they get there, the process they arrive to it. While there's a structure that I put in place, it's all 100% them. At this point, they're really digging in to do the work. The other thing that I hope you notice is that I think it's important that we just take time out and be strategic, because we're so busy with the day-to-day work that we do all the time that we don't ever have time to think about what it should look like 3 to 5 years from now. And even in our meeting, if you recall last week, Ryan, there were people who canceled at the last minute because they were too busy with stuff they had on their plate, which I think is so ironic in the context of strategic planning.
Yeah, right. I mean, how can
we had a good crowd, though. We had about 20 people there and got a lot of good work done, and it's on its way. So that's the good part.
It was a great group. It was a beautiful day in Buffalo. I thoroughly enjoyed going through that. And it's just sort of in strategy and planning is really important. And as we bring Matthew out here in just a second, we're going to talk a little bit more about career services as part of university advancement. And it's sort of a mini trend, I think, in our space. And it's a lot of strategic thinking that goes into making such an organizational change, right? And we'll ask Matthew about it, probably take years of consideration, of thoughtful deliberation internally to make such a sort of an important decision around an organizational alignment. Why do you think that is that, more and more schools are thinking about the importance of careers, internships, experiential learning, mentoring programs in the context of the career space underneath advancement?
And in fact, my answer would be the same whether it's under advancement or not. I think we'll debate that with Matthew in a moment, but I think higher education has been under pressure to be accountable for the cost of higher education, frankly, and show outcomes. And one of those is, if I'm a parent, is my kid on their way, going into grad school or getting that job or whatever it is they're going to do next. So having something where we can meet the expectations of parents and students to show the value proposition and why higher education, because there's plenty of jobs you could not go to college for, trade schools and others that are certainly, more than a living wage, and you can do quite well for yourself and have a great life without higher ed. But the traditional path that any of us who are on a higher education podcast are thinking about is that path. And why do we do it? Why do we spend that money? In some cases, a lot of money, $250,000 in some places for a 4-year education or more in some cases. So,
yeah.
But let's hear Matthew's thought on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and bring out our special guest for today. Hello, Matthew Lambert. It is great to have you on Alumless. How's it going?
Hey guys, great to see you both wearing your William Mary Green today.
I got my pennant up too.
Excellent.
Absolutely. Actually, this weekend is actually the University of Richmond, my alma mater's homecoming. So I'm wearing all blue and red this week in one fashion or another.
We'll forgive you for that, Ryan. I had forgotten about the Advancement Legends podcast, and I had forgotten you named me the all-time legend. I recall. Is that right? Of all the legends.
So. I think you are the legend of the legends. In fact, I think your episode may have been the most listened to.
Oh, come on!
Is that because you forwarded it to all your staff and you made them listen to it, or what?
We had everyone sit in one big room with their laptops. It was a fun professional development day.
That's hilarious. Well, it was great to speak with you then. It's always great to connect with you, and I'm so glad that you could be on the show this week. Careers are one of the 4 strategic priorities identified in the recently published Vision 2026 strategic plan at William & Mary. How is President Catherine Rowe thinking about the importance of careers, and why is this such an important thing and that rises to the strategic plan level?
Yeah, I think, Chris touched on some of this, but if you look back historically at universities, and particularly elite universities, I think we took very much the opinion that our job was to provide an opportunity for students to engage in the life of the mind, and that anything beyond that smacked of too much professionalization or trade school focus. And I think the reality in the environment we're in today, economically, politically, socially, we're in an environment where students and their families at every level of higher education are thinking about outcomes. And so what we try to think about at William & Mary is, what's the return on investment for that William & Mary degree? And is that ROI growing over time? Are we providing a meaningful opportunity while you're a student to engage in career-oriented opportunities? And are we helping you with that first job, with that third job, that fifth job, and that seventh job? So I think we've tried to move away from that either or mentality of it's either the life of the mind or it's a meaningful career, toward the both and, where we really try to provide that opportunity for people to think about, how am I going to grow as a professional? How am I going to grow as someone who can explore a variety of career pathways and find the one that's right for me?
Yeah, I think it's really exciting as someone who led a merged alumni and career team. I always get excited inside when I see another university taking that particular philosophy and moving it forward. But I know there's a lot of deliberation that goes into that, right? Sometimes years of thoughtful conversations and getting buy-in. To the degree that you can share, Matthew, could you talk about some of the conversations that were had at the sort of higher levels around this particular merger and some of the considerations that were taking place?
Yeah, I would say President Rowe, who came in 2018, we began talking immediately about this. She was trying to think about how do we scale the very successful efforts that our career team had made over the years. And that comes in a variety of forms. I mean, one of the ways that we had proven success in our campaign was in mobilizing our community of alumni to focus on annual participation, something that's a rarity today in higher ed and especially in public higher education. And we started talking about how could you mobilize that community of alumni to help in other ways. And when we look at the generations of alumni coming out of our institutions today, more and more of them want a more engaged, active experience than just getting a letter asking them to give or just getting called and asking them to give.
Right.
Finding ways that they can much more meaningfully circle back with the institution. And so then what you had was pandemic, which Uber accelerated everything we were doing at the time. And the president asked Kathleen Powell, who leads our career team, to lead a university-wide effort with all those individuals who had any aspect of career orientation in a much more holistic, unified, university-wide fashion, which broke down the silos immediately. It was one of the real benefits of the pandemic was the ability to break down some of those silos.
Right.
So the pandemic really just accelerated what was already underway and was an opportunity for us to bridge some of that gap. We had already in our campaign dramatically grown the focus on networking opportunities. You know, I think all of us who work in advancement know that the desire amongst our alumni to have another cocktail party is dramatically diminishing. And more of the interest is really around how can we find meaningful ways for people to connect. And that's larger around professional opportunities today. So it was a natural evolution coming out of the pandemic then for us to make this move.
It's interesting that first conversation back in 2018-19 when she arrives, right? And then you launched this officially. I mean, it became sort of public in FY23. So 4 years took to get to the point.
That's
so it's
right.
just not a overnight thing, right?
No.
There's a lot of consideration.
That's right.
Well, you have, as you mentioned, a top-notch career team there at William and Mary. Kathleen Powell leads the Career Development and Professional Engagement Office, and it's ranked #1 for internships right now across the country. And that said, internships remain a huge focus at William and Mary, specifically called out in the strategic plan. Can you share how you're thinking about some of the lofty goals the university has around internships and how you're envisioning alumni will play a role?
Sure. Let me just say a word about our team. We have, as you mentioned, an exceptional leader, Kathleen Powell. When the president made this move to move the team into university advancement, we renamed the team Career Development and Professional Engagement, and we retitled Kathleen as the university's first chief career officer. So really wanted to have that mindset from the outset that she was thinking about careers university-wide. And one of the commitments that we're making through our strategic plan is that we want to guarantee a funded internship for every student. Now, what you find increasingly with internships is that students who are able to engage in an internship, particularly one that's paid during their time, exponentially increases the likelihood of them getting that first job very quickly after graduation. And when you look at our communities that have traditionally represented in internships, our minority, our women, our veterans, our first generation students are underrepresented in internships. And so our desire is to make sure that every one of our undergraduates has an opportunity for that funded internship. And so what we're seeking to do is to really be that career partner throughout the lifetime, so that from the time you come as a freshman until you finish your last career role, that we are your partner throughout that process. And we want to open up and mobilize our network of more than 100,000 alumni to be involved in that process, to focus on externships, to focus on internships, focus on full-time employment, to focus on networking and career shifting within that. So part of that is getting alumni to open up the doors to provide those opportunities for our students. But it's also the opportunity for alumni to fund those internship opportunities. So giving a gift for a student who would otherwise be taking an unfunded internship to provide the funding that they don't have to decide between working at the restaurant in their hometown or getting a meaningful internship. We want to reduce those barriers so that every student has that same opportunity.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah, it's a fantastic initiative. I think more
really
schools are seeing that opportunity to really make a great impact by specifically funding unpaid internships and giving stipends, figuring out how to scale that across the university. I'm sure will be a great challenge to undertake. But Chris, so do you think the alignment of career service underneath a university advancement is a good way to go for most schools, if not all of them? And when is it the right choice versus when is it maybe not the right fit?
Yeah. You know my answer to, I bet you Matthew knows my answer to this too. The classic consultant response, right? It depends. Right? Matt, this is where we insert you giving me grief about consulting.
Yeah.
You're worth every penny, Chris. Every penny.
I actually do think that's the answer. I think there are a lot of factors, frankly, and I would start with the premise. I think it's worth considering. There's a nice marriage there. The fact is that today, from a data standpoint, the vast majority of them still reporting to the student affairs side of the house. You see it a little bit in the academic side and a little bit in this model here that we're talking about today. But I think there's many, many factors. I don't think there's a one size fits all answer to this. I do think that the number one things are the people in the, well, there's history and tradition of the institution, and you're already building on this great, foundation. But when you throw in the right president, the right vice president in Matthew, and in Kathleen as a leader there, that formula becomes, there's no doubt in my mind it's the right one. So when I say it depends, it actually does. In this scenario, the right leadership's in place, the right history and evolution. They got to the right evolutionary stage where it makes total sense to me that William & Mary's heading this route. I don't know that I'd apply that same formula or apply the same formula, but you may not get the same answers when you go through it with every institution. I suspect the larger you get, the harder this might be, but that's a hypothesis that I haven't tested fully because the models that I have seen, although there are some exceptions to this, UC San Diego being the biggest one, I know for sure. But the Longwoods, the Richmonds, the Bucknells, and others of the world are on the smaller side in terms of alumni population. But in this model, 100,000 is not that small either. So
it does.
So I gave you a really crappy consultant answer, right? Is what I did there. So.
It was only a mildly crappy answer, Chris. I feel like it actually was. Don't sell yourself short.
All right.
No, I think that it's a really good thing for any university to consider, particularly the ones who are really trying to take advantage of scarce resources to maximize efficiencies. Right. I talked to Kathleen the other day, and she was just overjoyed to have access to all the alumni data. Right. I mean, there's some barriers that exist when just some nuts and bolts barriers that exist when. But then I also found that, one of the things I never really had control over was the faculty, the academy, and ultimately really needed the academy to embrace the same narratives because they were the ones the students were always going to listen to. Right. So I think no matter where the alignment is, as long as the provost and the senior academic leadership are in on the plan and make career services narratives part of the classroom experience in different types of ways, then it's going to be successful. If there's pushback, then I think it's tough no matter what the alignment is to be successful. That was just my own personal.
I know, we script out, so people should know. We script out our questions, and I was reading through to get prepared for today, and I said to myself at this question, we should ask Ryan this question because he's the one that has the most experience in this. So I'm glad you weighed in there. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was, I love talking about this subject because it's a really interesting one, and often had people calling to ask, hey, what's the benefits and drawbacks of this alignment? But Matthew, what opportunities now exist now that hadn't before as a result of the Career Development and Professional Engagement Office being part of advancement?
Yeah, I agree with everything you and Chris said. I would add in anyone who's worked in advancement knows that historically there's been also this slow and now rapid evolution where alumni associations that had been separate and completely independent are now, for the most part, completely integrated with advancement organizations. And Chris, what's the number? It was something like fewer than 15.
Yeah, I think we're down to less than 10 of legally and financially independent alumni associations. Most of them are interdependent in terms of financials. Many are still legally independent,
Right.
but that's a different ballgame. But it's less than 10 that have full financial independence.
And I think the gnashing of teeth that takes place before the integration of an alumni association with a development office to create an advancement organization, we did that 8 years ago, and we had lots of fears. And within a few months, people realized, look, there is no desire to turn everything into a fundraising operation. For us to be successful ultimately with fundraising, we need students to get great jobs and to feel like their alma mater helped them get that great job.
Yeah.
It's like we need them to feel like there are opportunities for them to connect other than being asked to give. And so I think, to answer your question, Ryan, we've been able to do some of the little itty bitty things that have a lot of impact, such as having a single CRM system that our career team is using and that our advancement team are using, so that when someone is talking to a corporation, the left and right hands both know what's happening with that corporation. Or when an alum is meeting with a student, that the development officer working with that alum knows that they're doing more than just writing their check. So little things like that. But we've also been able, with the help of the president, to infuse significant resources into the operation. And I think that's what you find as part of an integrated advancement operation. We can think of this in a much bigger way, where we're not just focusing inward on the students, but inward as well as outward. We need to think about supply and demand. Yeah. And I think we've been able to focus that very, very effectively to be able to add to the team. I think we also have been able to open the eyes of our colleagues working in career services to the larger strategy behind the programming that we do, the work that we do to advance the institution. And we just last week closed a significant proposal that's going to result in a 7-figure gift to support internships on campus. That kind of integration is one of the early wins to show the success of this holistic integrated model. So I think you would find, in talking to our career team, that their opportunities have expanded, not contracted.
I think you're right. I had a chance to talk with another vice president of advancement at another Virginia state school not too long ago. He had a completely different take on it, right? Career services was expensive. It was part of a 20-year long-term strategy for advancement, for fundraising. Really was not something that, under his purview was likely going to result in sort of the immediate philanthropy growth that. So Chris, if you got a vice president,
hey, Ryan, just before you go on that, so I get laughed out of rooms very frequently also when I talk about alumni participation rates.
Interesting.
The same thing can be said for alumni participation, where a lot of vice presidents, because their time frame is usually 5 to 6 years max, the investment required to do a really good job on participation is the same as the investment required to do a really good job on career services. So I think in our profession, unfortunately, the time horizon for a lot of presidents and vice presidents is so short that they can't afford to focus on these long-term plays. And it is true. I get it. But I would continue taking those laughs for the long game that we're playing here.
Well, it's also your alma mater, Matthew. Like, you have the long-term in mind. And do you think that at all plays into the way that you feel about the strategy?
Sure. I mean, it absolutely does. I mean, I was at Georgetown University for 11 years. I would make the exact same argument there that the investment is about a long-term play, because the more we take a short-term approach to this, the more donors, alumni, and others look at us and say, well, you're not really thinking about the long-term here. You're really looking short-term.
Yeah.
My response to that is, if I had a VP say that and I had a chance to, I'd say to the president, you have the wrong VP. Because my take on it is you need both. You absolutely have to have both the long and the short-term game. But what Matthew just described in his scenario with his recent 7-figure gift, that's pretty recent. That's a short-term play that has paid
Yeah.
off, right? So I don't
Yeah.
buy it's a long-term play. I think if it's fully integrated correctly, the work that happens on the engagement side and on the career side, or even annual giving component to it, will pay off in this campaign, not just the campaign 2-3 from now. I'm not a big fan of that. Alumni engagement's going to help the third. Yeah, it will, but it can help this one. Same with career, same thing that Matthew just described.
Well, I wonder if the thought is it can also, help a future one. So 2 years ago, William and Mary successfully completed a 9-year-long For the Bold campaign, and you all raised $1 billion there. Of course, you're now imagining setting the stage, I suspect, for a future campaign. Does this merger of alumni, of career services underneath advancements, do you think it's going to have an impact on that campaign? I guess you're saying, are you saying that that's part of the strategy? Or are you taking a broader view that engagement in this way is best for the university part, whether or not it has an impact on the campaign?
Yeah, I think it's a both and approach here, where in our last campaign, we had 3 goals. One of those was to raise $1 billion. One of those was to reach 40% alumni participation. And one of those was to strengthen and deepen the connections among and between our alumni. So we took a broader view of a campaign. What is a campaign? Not just a singular dollar goal, but really the broader, what should a campaign be? It should really be a galvanizing effect, a galvanizing bringing together of your community around shared goals. And so when done well, you're getting more than just the 3% of donors who are giving you 90% of your dollars.
Right.
And, so in the last campaign, we focused heavily on participation. And that was an expensive play that's about the long term. In this next campaign, Dan Frezza, who led that effort for us so successfully in our last campaign, we're trying to take the lessons from that to think about how do you apply that toward careers. So if we ask alumni, in addition to making a gift, to open a door for a student, to provide an opportunity for someone for employment, they are going to have a deeper, richer connection to their alma mater than if we just ask them to make a gift. And by the way, the generation of students coming out of college today are going to have on average 7 to 11 careers, not jobs, not gigs, but careers.
Right.
So we as their alma mater have to be prepared to help them at every step along the way. And so we're thinking about this next campaign. Yes, it's one of the 4 strategic cornerstones that we've put out there. And it's going to be one of the large elements of our next campaign and how we think about fundraising and engagement in the next campaign.
And I love we work with other clients occasionally, mostly with just William and Mary. But when we have these conversations, it is so nice to be able to say and point to what you did in the 3-headed goal of your campaign. I can name 6 schools I'm working with right now that all have and have all looked at what William and Mary did and use that as a model for their campaign and thinking about it more holistically. So kudos. I just love that you were bold in that. So it's great.
For the bold, right? I mean,
for the bold.
Absolutely.
Well, we have plenty more to cover in the second half of our episode. What about episode, conversation chat with Matthew Lambert, which we will have in our bonus section of the podcast. Great conversation. Love this topic. We got some other topics that we'll discuss as well, including that more on that participation rate. But Chris, maybe you can tee up just who we're going to be featuring actually after Thanksgiving. We're taking the Thanksgiving holiday off.
Yeah. So I think early December is our next one live. We'll be with, I was going to say rising star, but she's a star. Tricia Stump from Indiana University is in her first gig as the leader. She's in her first year as the leader of the IU Alumni Association, but she spent many years before as the number 2 to a guy named JT Forbes, who we're going to have to get on the show one of these times, Ryan, because he's fantastic. One of the best leaders in the business. Mm-hmm. He's moved into a Matthew-like role at Indiana University where he's in charge of their foundation and has left his number 2 in charge of the now number 1 of the IU Alumni Association, Tricia Stump, and she's just fantastic. Has great ideas about things, has got a good head on her shoulders about metrics and measuring the work we do. So I think we'll have a fun and probably broad conversation with Tricia. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, they're doing some of the most unique stuff in the country, I think, in terms of putting a lot of the pieces together to be proactive around donor journeys and pipeline development and things of that nature. So it'd be great to talk with Trisha after Thanksgiving. All right. Well, thank you for listening to the live show. Hopefully the three of us, we've caught up with you in the comments section here on LinkedIn. Thanks for watching, and we will be back again after Thanksgiving. Bye now.
See ya.
Bye-bye.